On March 24th, 2025, Schedule 1 was released on Steam. No marketing, no warning, just...
Have you heard of this new indie game from a one-man dev team that's gotten crazy popular lately?
We're back at it again with another video, Schedule 1.
I didn't expect to find this same sense of cozy escapism in a game about manufacturing and selling drugs in a grimy city, but with Schedule 1, that's exactly what I got.
Schedule 1 is a game about friendship. It's about making connections. It's about starting from the bottom and working your way up. It's a game about drugs.
When I first wrote this episode, Schedule 1 was one of the most played games on Steam, with over 200,000 concurrent players. But even after a month, Schedule 1 is still one of the highest selling games on Steam. It was released in the same week as the greatly anticipated Assassin's Creed Shadows, and it not only outperformed it, but destroyed it. How did this happen? How did a game with an estimated $400 million budget get outshone in sales, attention, and overall enjoyment by a drug-dealing game made by one single developer? Schedule 1 is essentially a drug-dealing simulator. Set in the fictional town of Highland Point, its core gameplay loop contains growing, packaging, and selling drugs for a profit. As you increase your output, you grow your customer base, to the point where the entire town is addicted to your products. You also start from selling cannabis to moving on to more hardcore drugs in order to make a larger profit. And your main goal in the entire game is to become the kingpin of Highland Point, having everyone and everything in your control. When reading that aloud, it sounds like the game is pretty serious. But what makes this game so inviting is that even with a subject as heavy as drugs, it doesn't take itself seriously at all.
This game takes the basic idea that goes all the way back to Drug Wars, the game we all had on our TI-86 calculators back in the day, and it combines it with a crafting game and Grand Theft Auto. Kind of a first-person GTA Chinatown Wars, only you're not just selling drugs, you're also manufacturing them. Everything's a little exaggerated owing to the cartoonish characters, and while the graphics aren't going to blow everyone away, they're honestly more consistent and solid than you often get with these one-man indie games.
But this carefree style shouldn't discredit how seriously this game commits to the bit. A fun detail in the game is that certain drugs will create different visual effects on the customers, like making someone glow, getting them electrocuted, or even removing one of their eyes to make them look like a cyclops. And the drug dealing process is only one facet of the game. It has a police system, pickpocketing, cars, skateboards, money laundering. It has the full package.
Even repetitive tasks like harvesting reefer and packaging it into little jars for distribution are oddly enjoyable. Watering crops, mixing ingredients, and breaking a freshly baked tray of crystal all feel really satisfying and lulled me into a contented, meditative state that almost made me forget I was committing numerous felonies.
And when you combine a fun and addictive gameplay loop, pun intended, and mix it with incredible attention to detail in everything that surrounds it, the game is bound to gain some attention. But it's more than that. Beyond the pure fun that this game brings, the most impressive aspect about this game has nothing to do with the game itself, but the making of it. Because the entirety of this game was made by one single developer.
Games made by one guy, beating teams of 1,000 developers, tens of thousands if we're going to count Ubisoft in this conversation.
The game's biggest strength when it comes to the virality that it has achieved is that right now, indie game developers are providing players with the best experience in the entire gaming industry. First of all, indie games are games developed independently of major publishers, meaning the indie game creators retain complete control over their projects. This means that although indie developers want their game to sell well to earn a living, because there isn't any pressure to make a giant return on investment, their greatest motivation is their passion for making games.
Indie developers can afford to be more player-friendly because they don't have these investors hanging over their heads and these massive budgets.
And this is the first aspect in which indie games are doing right by gamers. Why players connect with this dynamic so much is that it adds a level of authenticity and personal touch to the playing experience. If a certain detail doesn't look the best, many other developers at bigger studios might have the attitude of good enough. But an indie developer who is passionate about what they're creating, they have the attitude of it needs to be better. And when a game is made from pure passion and has that attitude towards the game they make, players can always feel it through the game's quality. Indie games also often rely on limited resources, but make up for it with bold ideas, innovative gameplay, and a willingness to take risks that bigger studios might shy away from. This allows new releases to stay fresh, and they are able to push the boundaries of what is possible in games.
But like I said, AAA gaming has been in decline for some time. Meanwhile, indie games have become a spawning pool for creativity and imagination.
This constant movement and reinvention in indie games is what gamers love the most. Although sequels to successful games can also be very enjoyable, gamers will always yearn for new experiences. When an indie game can take a pre-existing genre and add a completely new twist on it, players will instantly be drawn to it. And on top of this personal, ever-evolving touch, indie games are just cheaper than their big budget competitors. In recent years, the average price of AAA games has skyrocketed, whereas indie game prices have relatively remained the same. And in the middle of a cost of living crisis, no gamer wants to be spending more than $100 on a single game. So when an indie game is more personal, more innovative, and is 80% cheaper than other games in their space, then it's no wonder why indie games are filling up players' Steam libraries. Okay, although the case for their success is strong, by no means are they perfect. I mean, what makes Schedule 1 such a surprise is that it is so well made right off the bat. Indie developers are aware of how difficult it is to make an enjoyable game. So instead of banking their success on a first release, a common practice is to first release the game in early access.
And why is a roguelite indie game about escaping hell over and over sounds simple, but play just so perfect? It's not because these indie developers are the most talented or have oodles of cash on hand. It's because they did one thing and one thing only. They followed the fun. That game about escaping hell over and over is the breakout phenomenon Hades. And I can't think of a game or a game studio more focused than them on following the fun. Why? Because Supergiant Games spent 2 years with Hades in early access, making sure every detail of the game was what the community wanted. Hades creative director Greg Kasavin said this about its 2-year early access. With Hades, we identified that we wanted to make an early access game first and foremost, to see what we could build in partnership with our community.
Although Schedule 1 feels so complete, their first release in March was also early access. This gives developers a period to gain feedback from their audience. From that feedback, they can then fix bugs, add some features, and pretty much do anything that is required to improve the player experience. When a developer is making every decision with the mindset of, can I make it better for the player? The results will always be the best game possible. And that kind of bookends the biggest reason why indie games are winning right now. All these decisions that go into the game's development and release are all made to serve one party, the most important party, the player.
Us gamers really only want one thing: to play a fun game, alone or with our buddies. And indie studios really understand this concept because they're gamers too. Indie studios these days are reminiscent of Tomohiro or the original Bungie team. Solo or small team developers who are focused on building something they or their community actually want to play.
The game design, the mechanics, the lore, even the price point of all indie games share the common goal of making the player experience better. That is why indie games are doing so well in the gaming industry right now. But that's not the full story. To be fair, indie games have always had this approach, so that's not the main reason why they are blowing up right now. This explosion of indie success is less to do with the indies themselves, but more their big budget competitors. AAA games. A AAA game simply refers to games that cost the most to develop and market, likening them to blockbusters of the gaming industry. Some popular AAA games include Red Dead Redemption 2, Cyberpunk 2077, and Zelda, which all had budgets of $100 million or more. In fact, if your game costs more than $100 million in 2025, chances are it's going to be a flop. So even with $100 million worth of resources to make the best game possible, how can AAA games continue to underperform? Firstly, a common approach taken by AAA studios is the open world design. Since the open world mechanic first gained popularity, every AAA studio has attempted their own open world game to get in on the action. And for a time, this was successful. But with each new release, open worlds needed to improve on the previous. AAA studios interpreted improvement as being bigger. So with each new release, the virtual world the player inhabits got bigger and bigger and bigger. to a point where now open worlds are bigger than ever.
Then on the flip side of that, if we were to now look at a load of the open world games that have come out over this time span, you'll see that a lot of them are fairly shallow. They have an open world that you can explore, but why explore something with no depth? But in the example of AC Valhalla, where it's a 70+ hour long game, the open world actually does need to start being good. The story can't hold it up for 70 hours of the player's time, and even that wasn't that good in Valhalla. So because of the issue of shallowness, you end up with games like Valhalla that end up leaving a bad taste in your mouth for loads of these sorts of games. You're feeling as if you're being dragged through the game, and that playing them is nothing more than a chore.
If a player enters a virtual world that doesn't feel alive and lived in, then they will struggle to immerse themselves completely. Every location they visit will feel like a copy and paste of the previous, which is a feeling that is also present in their overall creative direction. Take a look at this graph. It shows the top AAA games of 2024. Now, you might notice a pattern. Of these top AAA games, many of them are either sequels or additions to pre-existing IP. Franchises like Madden, Call of Duty, and NBA 2K are all notorious for releasing a new game every year that is just a carbon copy of the previous.
Gamers are tired of playing the same thing. We are tired of the formulaic nature of Ubisoft and most other AAA games.
Releasing the game every year but with a slightly noticeable difference is not conducive to a rewarding player experience. And it's important that I mention that this does work financially. In fact, the financial side of AAA games is exactly why they continue to reuse the copy and paste model. Because AAA studios' idea of a successful game is completely different to that of indie games.
Why force your devs to work on the 100th Assassin's Creed when they want to work on something new and exciting? The answer? Stability and money. This may be obvious to everyone, but milking an IP over and over again is the easiest way to make money as an entertainment company.
With each game released being more expensive than the last, it's important that AAA games take every opportunity to make the most money possible to provide a profit for the studio's investors. So this means that every decision made when it comes to the making of the game, whether it be the design, mechanics, or IP, their goal is to make the most money possible. The biggest reason why this way of thinking is disliked by players is because it is all at the expense of the player experience. When the world is bigger and blander than ever, that isn't always good for the player. When the content of a new game is almost identical to the previous, that isn't always best for the player. And when a player purchases a game for $100 and then is asked to pay another $30 to access everything the game has, that isn't always best for the player. The biggest reason for the AAA studio's underperformance in recent years is not necessarily to do with the IP, game design, or cost. It is that what the player perceives as important in a game and what AAA studios perceive as important are not aligned. Players want the best game possible, whereas AAA studios want the best return possible. The question now following Schedule 1's stardom is if it will cause any change within the gaming industry. Well, for AAA studios to change their approach in any regard, the change has to create a monetary gain that they aren't currently capitalizing on. That has been a big reason for why they have been so stagnant in this period of dissatisfaction from gamers. Although the perceived quality of each release is decreasing, AAA titles are making more money than ever before. So the only way a change happens is if it makes the big studios more money. As for indie games, they will most likely continue to be the beacon for reinvention and creativity.
For every bad AAA game released, 10 great indie games are released simultaneously. I mean, why is the Untitled Goose Game the best stealth game I've ever played?
Hey! I'll just take this.
That is what makes indie games so special. A game like Schedule 1 that challenges industry norms can rise above all the manicured AAA titles and take the top spot on a global scale. Indie games are and will continue to act as trailblazers. And if indie games continue to surpass their AAA competitors more consistently, then it might force AAA studios to pay attention. If AAA really is to change, then the path they take needs to be laid by indie games that achieve global success. One of the biggest examples of this is Minecraft. It's easy to forget that Minecraft was originally an indie game. Although now under the Microsoft umbrella, Minecraft was originally developed by a small team at Mojang Studios. It was first released in 2010 in alpha, an early access period, and it eventually grew more and more. Fan communities for the game grew to the point where they were able to host a convention to celebrate the launch of the full game in late 2011. And like it is today, this was a once-in-a-blue moon event where an independent release takes over the online world. Minecraft achieved this by doing the same thing as indie games do today. While most AAA games at the time were self-contained win-lose archetypes, Minecraft turned that format on its head. The game had no story, no instructions, just a near infinite open world sandbox and the player's imagination. Becoming the most successful game of all time, it broke the mold for what players could enjoy in a game. So the key takeaway from Schedule 1's success is that it perfectly illustrates the power that the player holds within the gaming industry. The passion and enthusiasm for a quality gaming experience is what drives progress within the gaming industry. Without the player, the industry ceases to exist. If AAA titles are losing their quality, players will be there to let studios know. And when an indie game provides one of the most fun playing experiences in recent years, gamers will always be there to push it further into the limelight.